Hello. So we are moving to our last couple of lectures, mini lectures. Um, Today we're going to be looking at chapter 9, Dionysus, and then chapter 10, the first chapter dealing with Greek heroes. Um, so, regarding Dionysus, Dionysus is the god of wine. He is also the god of Greek drama, which is basically Athenian drama because drama was invented in Athens and was pretty much performed almost exclusively in Athens initially. So, Dionysus, he is a god marked by presence. Now, of the Olympian gods, he is the one who is viewed primarily in terms of presence. So when you are doing a ritual in honor of Dionysus, the idea is that Dionysus is there with you in the ritual. This is unique among the gods, right? Hermes is someone who hangs around with humans a lot and knows a lot about humans, but there's still some distance. And gods like Apollo and Zeus are seen as quite distant, that you can only sort of like maybe hint at what they're getting at through the intercession, of priests at a temple. But Dionysus, in a sense, is accessible to everyone because he is in the wine that people consume. So it's like you're basically taking God into you, an idea which then the Christians also use in the communion rite. So the literary selection that is mentioned or that is covered is some scenes from Euripides' play Bacchae, the Bacchae. Now, the Bacchae is one of Euripides' last plays. It was performed posthumously. It was in that posthumous performance. He died in 406. It was performed in 404. In that posthumous performance of Euripides' remaining plays that got produced in that year, he won first prize. And Euripides did not win first prize often. He won 4 times through his entire career. So the Bacchae apparently was quite a popular play. But the image it presents of Dionysus is rather striking because though one could argue that you can't insult a god and get away with it, and Pentheus, in a sense, was asking for trouble, still, Dionysus is sort of sneaky how he goes about it, and he really sort of undermines Pentheus and, makes Pentheus, convinces Pentheus to take actions that result in his death. So there's this sort of cruelty here that some people read the play as sort of an attack on religion, specifically like ecstatic religion. But the reason I don't believe that is the play or the play as one of 4 plays did win first prize, and the Athenian audience, if they saw this as an insult to Dionysus, would not have given it first prize. So the scholarship in chapter 2 looks at a different type of ritual and sees in it inversions. So the Apollo Artemis is about sort of reinforcing social conventions and helping people make the transition from their childhood to their adulthood role. But again, that's all within the approved mechanisms of the society. The Bacchic rites, on the other hand, challenge your upend social conventions rather than reinforce them. So when you are in one of these rituals, you are often intoxicated, and people, when they're intoxicated, do not act like their normal day-to-day self, right? Society is not built on people being drunk. That would be a bad way to build a society. So but what we tend to see is this is a moment where you let your guard down, where you basically let go of things for a moment. So you go back to your normal life, right? Friday night comes, you go out drinking, you might not feel so great on Saturday, but by Monday you're back on the job and you're doing your day-to-day job, right? That's sort of the normal pattern that we have. So this isn't like the norm that you're supposed to live, but rather it questions that norm and says, yeah, there's also another path, right? There is something besides the day-to-day norm. So that's really what's going on with Dionysus. Now, these are different than the type of rituals that we saw with Apollo and Artemis. Those were rituals of elevation, right? You change your status from something to something else, and it's seen as a permanent change. With Dionysus, that is not the case. So there might be some gender bending, there might be some other things that go on in the Dionysiac rituals, but then when the rituals are over, you go back to your normal life. One thing, though, that apparently the worship of Dionysus was very popular with women. Of course, in their case, getting relief from the day-to-day grind was probably more important than it was for the men, because the women, of course, did not have much power outside of their home and the family, right? That's where they had their power. So the work here from elsewhere in the Mediterranean in this chapter is a poem by Catullus. Catullus's poems are numbered, and so they're just pretty much known by the numbers. So this is Catullus, poem 63. It sometimes is given the subtitle Attis, and it is about the guy Attis. So Attis was a Greek person who traveled to the Turkish mainland, into the area where the worship of Siboli, who was a great mother goddess, an Eastern mother goddess, was worshipped. And if you remember, when we talked about Artemis of Ephesus, there are elements in Artemis of Ephesus that are a lot like the rituals for Siboli. So this Eastern goddess is seen as a sort of wilder figure. The males who serve her, they are castrated. So to be a priest of Siboli, you have to be a castratus. And so in this story, what we get is we've got Attis arriving. He gets into the ritual. During the ritual, he castrates himself. Then he basically passes out. And then the next morning when he wakes up, he has sort of second thoughts, because in effect he's made this rather dramatic change in his life, and now he's thinking, what did I give up for this? And there's doubt, and then he's chased by the goddess, sort of to get him back into line, is how the poem goes. Now, one of the things we see here is Catullus is a very liberal and very sexually sort of open Roman, but he's still a Roman, and the Romans have rather fixed ideas, I think, of male and female. It's very sort of heteronormative, more so than the Greeks. So there is a Roman aversion to ecstatic religion and castration. So Roman religion is very much more ritual, and it's all about keeping order. The Romans don't go in for ecstatic stuff much. It doesn't mean that the Romans didn't get drunk or they didn't do other wild stuff, but that's not going to be sort of approved by the society. There was a temple of Siboli in in Rome, but the priests of Siboli, who have to be castrated, a Roman citizen could not become a priest of Siboli because the Romans had laws against self-mutilation. And you can see this in the poem. I mean, the opening lines get Attis castrated like very quickly. I mean, like it happens really quickly. Like if you read those first like 15 lines, it's like he's into the ritual's wild, he's going crazy, he's dancing, he's castrating himself, whoops, and it's suddenly like that passes by very, very quickly. And then there's this weird sort of like afterwards that's much longer, and there's a lot of regret and everything else. That seems to me to represent a Roman attitude towards the Attis story. Because I think in the original Greek version, the original sort of Eastern Greek version, in the worship of Siboli, this was seen as sort of like a transformation, right? It wasn't seen as like a horrific thing, but as something like, he's transcended his sexuality and he is now a servant of Siboli. We're not really getting that in this work by a Roman author who's, despite his liberal tendencies, is pretty conservative on the sex stuff. The Nachleben for chapter 9 is the main thing focused on is a play called Dionysus in 69. This was an off Broadway show done in New York in 1969. It basically does the Bacchae, but the theater in which it took place didn't have a clear stage area and house area. Rather, the actors sort of performed in the center, the audience was seated all around, but the audience could enter the stage area and actors from the stage area could go out and interact with the audience. So it was a much more fluid thing, as if then everyone in the audience is part of the Bacchae. That's sort of the setup there. And apparently it got quite wild and sort of sexually suggestive as well. There is a film version of this that you can see on YouTube if you look it up. Brian De Palma, who later went on to make Carrie and some other movies, he's the one who directed the film. I think he was a student filmmaker at NYU at the time, but it's not a easy to watch film just because it's black and white, it's grainy, it's sort of tough to see exactly what's going on, but it is available. Wole an African author who won the Nobel Prize, he did a version of the Bacchae called the Bacchae of Euripides, a communion rite, in which he looks more sort of at that aspect of the Bacchae story, sort of how it affects the community. And, one way to look at the Bacchic rite of sparagmos, right, tearing apart the victim, and then homophagy, eating the victim that has supposedly been possessed by the god. So you're taking the god into you, does actually mirror what happens in Roman Catholic communion. Of course, that's a bloodless sacrifice, whereas the ancient Greek sacrifices were not bloodless. And then the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which tells the story of Dr. Frankenfurter, this sort of transvestite mad scientist that two sort of middle America young people, Brad and Janet, I think that's their names, they come upon his sort of secret lab, and he gets sort of caught up in his world, and they get transformed by the experience, right? So they move from being sexually repressed to sexually expressive in the course of the film. It's sort of fun. It's a fun film, and it used to be that they would do performances of this on a regular basis, like usually in a theater. When I lived in Chicago, the Biograph Theater, every Friday and Saturday night had a midnight show of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I used to go to see art films at the Biograph. It generally showed foreign films, and I sometimes went to a show like at 8 o'clock on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and when I came out, there would be people already lined up in costume to get ready to go to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because what they would do is they'd get dressed up as Brad or Janet or as Frankenfurter, and then they would act out those parts in the movie, right? They knew all the lines of the movie, and they would interact with the movie. So very much like a Bacchic rite, by a Dionysiac rite. Okay, so that's what we've got for Dionysus, who's the last of the Olympian gods. And now we're going to look at chapter 10, which deals with heroes. Now, Greek heroes are different than heroes that we would think of. When we think of heroes, we think of people who will do something selflessly for others, right? Someone who risks their life, like a fireman, right? Who risks his or her life to save someone, right? We look at those people as heroes. They're doing something for something greater than themselves. That's not necessarily what you're getting with Greek heroes. The key thing for a Greek hero is that the Greek heroes do something extraordinary. There's something that they do that is extraordinary. That may be good, it may be bad. So a figure like Timothy McVeigh, for instance, in American history, right, he's the guy behind the Oklahoma City bombing. He might very well be viewed by the Greeks as a hero. He did something extraordinary. Now, it was extraordinarily terrible, but it's still extraordinary. And the other thing is that they were remembered and even worshipped after their death. So the key thing with, one of the things about Greek heroes is that these vital figures, and when they die, the assumption is that they still want to hold on to life in some way, and that they're resentful of the fact that they're dead. And so you have these shrines to them, partly to calm them down so that they don't actually do something to the city. That seems to be the idea. And they might actually help the city, right, because they have the power to do that, but it's mainly to sort of make sure that they don't hurt the city. Now, the figure of Cleomedes that is mentioned there, Cleomedes was an Olympic athlete. He participated, it seems like, in wrestling and an event called the Pancration, which was basically like a wrestling boxing mix that could get quite violent. It was much more, think of like, I guess, mixed martial arts, but with like very, you could do pretty much anything. There were a couple things you couldn't do. And apparently Cleomedes, when he was participating at the Olympic Games, he did one of them. He was expected to win. He did one of them. He got disqualified. And so then he had to go home in shame. He was very angry, as you might imagine. He's going through a town. In that town, there were some school children who were singing. He is so angry that he goes to the building where the kids are singing. He knocks out the support, and the roof caves in, and then the kids all die. Right, so this again, sort of like Timothy McVeigh, right? He destroyed a building, and a lot of kids died. I mean, a lot of adults did too, but it's the kids, I think, mainly that make it even more horrific. And then he gets chased into a temple. The rule is if someone's in a temple, they cannot be forcibly taken out of the temple, so they can call sanctuary. And this used to be true also of Catholic churches. You weren't able to be arrested if you were in the church. But of course, the church is going to try to get you to give yourself up. And the same thing would happen with the temple. Cleomedes gets in there. He's all by himself in the temple. The people wait him out. They basically wait a month, make sure no food goes in. And after that, they figure, he's passed out from hunger. They go in to investigate to see if that's the case, and he's not there, and they're puzzled, like how did he get out, because the building was surrounded. They go to see Apollo at Delphi. They ask Apollo what's going on, and he says, you need to build a shrine to Cleomedes. So Cleomedes is a Greek hero. There's a shrine to him. He did something extraordinary. It was not a good thing, but he's still a hero by the Greek definition. The literary selection, there are three that come from Homer's Iliad. Achilles is a hero marked by rage. The opening word of the poem is rage. In Greek, it's menon, but that means rage. And he is consumed by a sense that he is the best of the Achaeans. So he's the best Greek warrior. But in Book 1 of the Iliad, Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief of the Greek forces, insults him. And then he basically says, I'm done. I'm not fighting for you anymore. None of my guys are fighting for you. And since he's the best warrior, the Greeks then start losing. And they start losing bad. Like almost, I think all of the major Greek heroes, except for Ajax, get wounded and are out of action. So things are really bad for the Greeks. He eventually comes back, but he only comes back after his friend Patroclus, who went in as a sort of substitute in Achilles' armor to give the Greeks some breathing room. He gets killed by Hector, and so then Achilles is consumed by rage at Patroclus' death, he goes and gets vengeance by killing Hector. And then the poem ends with him giving up the body of Hector, giving up his rage. He gives up the body of Hector to Priam, the king of Troy, so that Hector can have the hero's burial that he deserves. And the poem actually ends with the funeral of Hector. The last line of the poem is, "That was the funeral of Hector, breaker of horses." So that's how it ends. So Achilles is still alive at the end, but he knows he's going to die because his death is somehow connected to Hector's death. So in killing Hector, he, in a sense, is sort of committing suicide, but he doesn't care because he's lost his best friend. All right. But again, he's a hero who does something that's extraordinary by sitting out the war, and it causes lots of trouble for the Greeks, the people who's, they're his teammates. Okay. The scholarship for Chapter 10 does feature an important figure, a guy named Vladimir Propp, who in the 20s wrote a work called The Mythology of the Russian Folktale. What he did was, there was a catalog of Russian folktales, and he took 100 of them, the 100 that were quest stories. So a quest story is where a hero goes out on a mission. Like, get the golden fleece, get the head of Medusa. Those are quest stories when you're going out to get something, or you're on some sort of mission. And there were 100 Russian quest stories, and he looked at those, and what he saw among those 100 stories was that there were 7 basic character types, personae, in the story. These would, of course, be the hero, but there was also a figure called the false hero. So with the Iliad, that would be Achilles, and Patroclus would be the false hero. He gets dressed up as Achilles and briefly basically takes his glory. He does it for a good reason, but still that makes him sort of a false hero. You've got a donor, someone who gives the hero something that helps him do his mission, the person who sends them on the mission. So there are 7 of these types. And then there are 31 functions. These are narrative elements. So things like the hero receives a call, the hero is given some information, the hero is given a magical weapon, right? So there are these different things. Now, the key thing that Propp makes out is that those 31 motifs occur in the 100 stories, but not all 31 in every story. The key thing is they always appear in the same order. So say a story only has 10 of those, they're still going to be in the order of like number 1, number 8, number 10, number 12, number 15, number 19, and so forth. They're going to be in the order that he's got them in a numeric order, and they'll always be in that order. And there aren't any that are outside the 31, so there aren't any additional ones. So it's a structural way of looking at a narrative way of looking at things, how the story is put together. It's sort of interesting. The actual selection from Propp is from like the introduction to his book, and I think it's not overly helpful. He basically makes the point: these stories all have the same form. They all have certain things in it, like these 31 things. And it's just like laying out that's the nature, that these stories do not change in their overall structure. His writing is tough to sort of follow, so I'm not sure you get a lot out of reading the Propp, but definitely read the Maurizio introduction to the Propp, because that tells you about the 31 functions and what they are, and the 7 character types and who they are. So that part is worth knowing. And Propp, of course, was not considering Greek mythology, so there is a question like, how much does this apply to Greek myth as opposed to these Russian quest stories? The other Mediterranean literature we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, which is much older than the Iliad. And Gilgamesh is a great hero. He's a lot like Achilles. He's a lot focused on himself and his own privilege. When we first see him, he's actually really sort of terrible to his people. I mean, he's a great king, so he has unlimited power, but he uses it basically like to rape all the women and apparently rape some of the boys, and he's really abusing the power that he has. Another guy is created, a guy called Enkidu, and Enkidu is Gilgamesh's equal. They fight, they come to a draw, then they become best friends. Then the two of them go out and have adventures where they kill a bunch of monsters, making life better for the people of Uruk, the city that Gilgamesh is the ruler of. So what happens is Gilgamesh gets out of himself and becomes a hero more in our sense of the word. He's doing things for his people, not just for himself. We also have a selection from books 11 and 12 of the Aeneid, in which the main character Aeneas first bewails a young man who died, fighting for Aeneas, and then, of course, the final scene between Aeneas and Turnus, the great Latin hero that he has to defeat, and it actually ends with the killing of Turnus. The ending of the poem, we get the ending, and it's very striking and very shocking because Aeneas is about to spare Turnus. He's defeated him, but he's about to spare his life, and then his eyes turn red, and he basically runs the guy through, and the guy's ghost goes screaming to the underworld. The end. So it's a very shocking and stark and sudden ending, which some have caused some people to question: was he questioning the whole idea of the Roman Empire? And I think the answer to that is no, he was not. But I think he was saying that the ideal of the Roman Empire, for humans to live up to that ideal, is pretty much impossible. They're going to give in to their weaknesses sooner or later. All right, and the Nachleben for this, it looks at Achilles, the figure of Achilles, in modern war poems. And there's a poem from World War I, there's a poem from World War II, there's a poem from the Troubles in Northern Ireland by a Northern Ireland poet. And all of them use the figure of Achilles in talking about their own war and their own war experience. And there's one final thing there's not a poem about Vietnam, but there is a reference made in the Maurizio discussion of a work by Dr. Jonathan Shea. He is a psychiatrist, so he's a medical doctor, but he's also a doctor of psychiatry, who works at the Mass General Hospital, or who used to be, probably retired now. And he also is a professor at Harvard Medical School. So he, one of the things that he did was he would have these group sessions, right? These group therapy sessions with Vietnam vets, trying to process their experience. And what he did with them is he had them all read the Iliad in a translation, and then they could use the story of Achilles and reflect on how that made them feel. In other words, how was Achilles' experience like their experience? And he tells about this in a book called Achilles in Vietnam, which I highly recommend. I mean, it's a great book. It's very readable. And he makes some interesting comments about what made Vietnam especially difficult, and why you had so many people come back from Vietnam really broken in a way that World War II and World War I didn't quite have. So that's it for this. It's a fairly long mini lecture, but it covers 2 chapters, and there's a lot in those 2 chapters. I love the Iliad. I think, I wish there were more of the Iliad. I wish there were other parts of the Iliad in the book, but I do recommend that maybe you sometime pick up a translation of the Iliad. I would recommend, if you are so minded, Robert Fagel's translation, I think, is the best of the translations in English. Stanley Lombardo also does a nice translation, and Stanley Lombardo has an abridged version called the Essential Iliad, where you get the main bits, and you get like summaries of the parts that he skipped. And that would give you maybe enough of the storyline to really get it. Sadly, what Maurizio provides is not really enough to get a full sense of Achilles' rage and how Homer is basically questioning the nature of heroism. Achilles is the greatest warrior. He is the greatest hero of the Greeks in the Iliad. There is no doubt about that. But that said, that also means he can do tremendous damage, and so there's the problem with heroes. If heroes can do great good, they can also do great harm, and that's a problem. and we don't really get a feel for that in the selections Maurizio provides. So, till next time.